If people can hear me out in the hallway, please come on in, grab your coffee and your muffins. My publicist over here. That's all right. That's all right. That's right. Okay, folks. Well, welcome. Good morning. I'm glad that the weather held up for us. Often at these annual assemblies, we have cold, rainy weather. So nice to have a nice day out there today. Thank you for coming. We got a full day ahead of us, so we're going to jump right in. This is the PCL's 2025 Annual Environmental Assembly. We're calling it California Innovating for the Future, even more critical today. It's kind of an appropriate title. And we're focusing on that innovation because over the last several years, we've had more and more panelists really talking about what types of innovation we can look at for solutions for our problem sets and our strategies ahead. And so we figured we'd just highlight that this year and ask all of our panelists to bring some innovative solutions to the conversation. My name is Howard Penn. I'm the Executive Director of Planning and Conservation League, and want to welcome you to our full day here ahead of us. First, I'd like to thank our co-host, UC Davis Law School and the California Environmental Law and Policy Center. And I'd like to thank Professor Frank, the director of the center, for hosting us, and your wonderful team. Jesus and Andrea have been wonderful to help us organize this. So I'd like to invite Professor Frank up to the mic to welcome all of us.
Thank you very much, Howard. And on behalf of the UC Davis School of Law and the California Environmental Law and Policy Center, I'm proud and thrilled to welcome PCL back to King Hall for its 2025 Environmental Assembly. This is not our first environmental rodeo. Those of you who've attended these events in the past may know that we were fortunate enough to host you last year and a number of times in past years. So you've always got a warm and welcoming home here for future assemblies and related PCL events if you so choose. I also have it on good authority that a big milestone is here, and that this year marks the 60th anniversary of the founding of the Planning and Conservation League. That's really an important accomplishment. So congratulations, Howard, to you and your predecessors and all of your board members and affiliates. It's great. The PCL staff and board have done a wonderful job of organizing this year's Environmental Assembly. If you've taken a look at the agenda, I don't have to say any more. We're all going to learn a great deal today. The last thing I'd like to say is that I personally and a couple of my colleagues have had the opportunity to collaborate in recent years with PCL on a variety of important policy and legal initiatives, meaningful and appropriate reforms of the California Environmental Quality Act, and most recently, the late Jonas Minton organized, and I was privileged to participate in a still ongoing effort to reform California's antiquated water rights laws. And through the effective advocacy of Howard and his colleagues, a number of those recommendations that we made at the end of 2021 are now firmly established in California law. So that's been a great collaboration, and I'm proud, along with Kerrigan Burke, my faculty colleague here, to be on your planning team and that initiative team that still continues to work on this day, to this day. So again, like you, I plan to learn a great deal today. It's great to see so many familiar faces, and I wish you a very successful and enjoyable 2025 assembly. Welcome to King Hall.
Professor Frank has been invaluable joy to work with, and I wish I could attend his law classes and sit in the back and be that troublemaker I used to be in elementary school. September 12th is the 60th gala, and you'll all get emails about that later, but I figured I'd give you that date just in case I forget to tell you later. Next, I'm going to invite the chair of the PCL board up to say a few remarks.
Thank you, Howard, and good morning, everybody. My name is Douglas Karstens. I'm the chair of the board of the Planning and Conservation League, and on behalf of the board, we'd like to welcome you all to this assembly of 2025. And I'd also especially like to thank Professor Frank and Dean Berg and the UC Davis Law School and the students, everybody helping us today. We really appreciate. It feels like home, and thank you for having us. Howard asked me to say something inspirational today, and I'd really like to do that this morning, but I think you get it. I think you get it. It takes you know, a really hard look to find inspiration in the grim reality of today and the climate change and the consequences we're facing at the moment. Dramatized this week and this month. I was out of the country on vacation. I was in the Philippines in sort of since January 6th, that, you know, date, just until a couple days ago. And I left my voice over there. You might notice I've probably got about 5 minutes of vocal cords, so you won't hear much more from me. But flying back over the LAX airport, we flew over the devastation that was wrought in Pacific Palisades and Altadena and other communities there. People lost their homes and some lost their lives. About 28 and counting. There's more. The fires are still going and people, the search is still on. I'd like to take a moment of silence this morning to remember those who had lost their lives as the consequences of the perfect storm or perfect firestorm of climate change and planning decisions and regulatory decisions that have been made over time. And then I'll describe where I find inspiration and perhaps share some of that, and also a little bit about today's conference. But for a moment, please join me in a short moment of reflection and memory and silence for the lives that were lost in the fires in Los Angeles County recently. Thank you. Not only are the wildfires a consequence of climate change, but the floods in Northern California and the abnormally chilly weather that we've seen across the country. You've got snow in New Orleans. Have people seen that? That's Mardi Gras. You know, I hope it's not snowing on Mardi Gras. Where I find inspiration is in the words of my friend, Gideon Krakoff. Some of you actually might know him. He's well known in the state, and he lost his family's home in these wildfires. His family's safe, but he lost the house. And when I wrote to support and comfort him, he wrote back, "We are safe, we lost the home and we will grieve, but we'll try to rise from the ashes like a phoenix." And I thought that phoenix rising from the ashes message of resilience and hope is something we can all hang on to as we look to the future and enduring the realities of many different sorts today, local, state, and national. And I'm reminded also of the, I wasn't there, but 40, 50 million years ago when the comet hit the Earth and the mammals took shelter under the ground. That comet hit the Yucatan Peninsula. It wiped out the dinosaurs. I mean, scientists tell me, I believe in science. And it wiped out the dinosaurs, but the mammals survived. They survived underground with the winter overhead and the chaos and destruction. And they were storing seeds and and hope within their burrows for the future. And the dinosaurs that had ruled the earth for millions of years disappeared or were, let's say, eliminated by Darwinian evolution. But the mammals came back out and they took over. And here we are. So amidst all the destruction and chaos of today, there are reasons for hope and much to plan for the future, and we'll discuss some of that today. We have a great assembly organized. Its overarching thought that innovating for the future is more effective and meaningful when we do it together as part of this assembly and as part of the Planning and Conservation League. The League is like a quilt. We all have our circles of friends and connections, and all together we form a pretty powerful and effective quilt. So we're looking forward to discussions today, how to plan for wildfires and their effects and prevention, groundwater supplies and flooding, considering such things as resilient infrastructure and insurance, fundamental questions, how do we deal with these challenges in the future? It's a chock-full day today. We've got Environmental Hero Awards. We've got keynote speakers, Attorney General Bonta, when he's not suing to save things, and science fiction writer Kim Stanley Robinson. I noticed his book propped over there, or one of his books, I should say. There's others. This afternoon. And for our plenary session this morning, which we'll get right to, we're going to be celebrating a unique asset, California's coast. It's like an heirloom. It's a, there have been triumphs, there's been challenges, there's a continuing struggle to protect, but I view it sort of like, I view the triumphs like the seeds that those mammals kept in those burrows. It's something that we can treasure, we'll remember, we'll celebrate a little bit today on some recent good news and activities, and remember that for the future challenges and times, to come. So again, I'd like to welcome you all, and I'd like to ask if you wouldn't mind helping me to welcome in a round of applause for the Legislative Director of the California Coastal Commission and the Chair of the panel in the plenary session, Sarah Christie. Please help me welcome Sarah.
Thank you, Doug, for that lovely introduction, and thanks to PCL for making space for this conversation this morning. Timing is everything, right? And when we first started talking about this panel a couple months ago, we didn't fully appreciate how squarely and directly the California coast and the Coastal Commission would be directly in the national news. So I'm anticipating a lively conversation today. And honestly, I've been looking forward to it for quite a while, because when I first got the call to brainstorm ideas about how to celebrate 50 years of successful coastal conservation, at that time, I was like a kid in the candy store, right? Because there's just so many great stories about how ordinary people have stepped forward time and again over the years to save the coast. And every single one of those stories could be its own riveting, super dramatic biopic. But collectively, those stories are literally the reason why California's 1,200-mile coastline is still the envy of the world today. So I'd like to ask you all to take a moment and just picture in your mind's eye your favorite coastal place. It might be the beach you got married on, or maybe that spot where you first laid eyes on the Pacific Ocean. Or maybe it's that stretch of the Pacific Coast Highway where you would pull over on your way home from work to decompress after getting off the night shift at 2 o'clock in the morning. But wherever those spots are for each of you, and all the spots in between all those spots, I can pretty much guarantee you that the reason you were able to make those memories is because at some point in the past, a bunch of people you probably don't even know came together and fought a really spirited battle to save that specific spot for you, for us, for future generations. I mean, Point Reyes, Pigeon Point, Crystal Cove, Arroyo de la Cruz, all those places still look the way they do today because of sustained, focused public advocacy that informed enlightened governmental decisions. You know, there's hardly 1 square foot of the California coast that hasn't been the subject of contested real estate at some point in the past, oftentimes more than once. The agency that I work for, the California Coastal Commission, and the law that we implement, the Coastal Act, has been central to many of those battles. But at the center of the Coastal Act is the people of California, who've come together time and again to save those places that they love. Not for their private luxury enclaves, but for the beauty and the peace and the joy that the California coast and ocean offers to everyone, regardless of zip code. 50 years ago, when PCL was 10, California voters made history when they passed Proposition 20. And we're going to talk about that extraordinary campaign in a little bit. But what I need you to know for now is that that could have easily gone the other way. That could have totally gone the other way. Development interests could have prevailed, and the state would have continued on its trajectory of approving luxury gated oceanfront subdivisions for millionaires and blocking historic access to the beach and surf breaks and traditional fishing grounds, and expanding the sacrifice zones throughout the state that are pockmarked with polluting, toxic infrastructure. That could be where we are today, but we're not. Because instead, generations born since 1970 have inherited the legacy of the default assumption that California's coast belongs to everyone, and that abundant access to it is just the natural order of things. It's a given. It's the way things have always been. It's the way things are always going to be. And then they're shocked when they travel to another state to learn that other places people can actually own an entire beach, that you have to be a dues-paying member of an exclusive social club or a homeowners association to even have the right to walk on the sand, that you can actually get arrested for trespassing for surfing on somebody else's waves. I mean, think about that. It's crazy, right? And then, you know, you shake your head and you feel so lucky you live in California, and you are. But if we've learned anything over the last several years, it's that no fundamental bedrock principle is immune from erosion when the dark political stars align. You know, Peter Douglas, the Commission's longest-serving director and environmental visionary, was fond of saying, many people in this room, I'm sure, have heard him say it directly, the coast is never saved. It's always being saved. And those words were never more true than they are today. There are some dark clouds gathering on the horizon. So while today's conversation is rightfully a celebration of 50 years of extraordinary coastal success, it's also a guidance manual for the next 50 years as we continue to ask the question, how do we keep saving the coast? So we have 4 extraordinary panelists with us today. I'm so grateful that they're donating their time to carry on this conversation today. I'd like them to come on up now, and I'm going to go take my seat amongst them. Dr. Charles Lester is the director of the Ocean and Coastal Policy Center in the Marine Science Institute at UC Santa Barbara, where he researches, writes, and consults on sea level rise, coastal resilience, and coastal law and policy. He Received a BA in geochemistry from Columbia before earning his PhD and his law degree from UC Berkeley. Charles spent 20 years with the California Coastal Commission, including 5 years as its executive director. In 2015, he led the agency's completion of the state's first comprehensive land use guidance for addressing sea level rise and coastal protection, and is internationally noted as an expert, a subject matter expert in that topic. Todd Holmes is a historian and academic specialist with the Oral History Center at UC Berkeley. He received his PhD from Yale University and was a historian with the Bill Lane Center for the American West at Stanford when he became interested in California coastal history. Over the years, his work has ranged from documenting the history at the Japanese American Redress Program, California's signature Global Warming Solutions Act, to the evolution of West Coast cannabis growers and the history of the California Coastal Commission. In addition to his work at Berkeley, he and his partner Heidi Holmes operate Tie-Day Productions, a digital storytelling company that just produced a full-length feature documentary on Proposition 20. So we're looking forward to hearing from him today. Also joining us today is Susan Jordan, the founder and director of the California Coastal Protection Network and a dear friend of mine for many, many years. CCPN is a nonprofit strategic consulting and advocacy organization that works with communities and NGOs to uphold the Coastal Act. For 25 years, her organization has been at the center of numerous successful challenges to large-scale projects that pose significant adverse impacts to coastal communities and resources. She'll be sharing some of those stories with us today. And rounding out the panel is Violet Sage Walker, Chairwoman of the Northern Chumash Tribal Council in San Luis Obispo County, where she carries on the coastal advocacy work of her late father and former tribal chief, Fred Collins. She works to combine indigenous knowledge with marine science to heal the ocean environment and repair the universal bonds between humans and the sea. She holds a BA in pre-law, political science and religious studies, is a master diver, and a 7th-generation beekeeper. So I'd like to ask you all to, for a round of applause to welcome our panelists. Sorry, we've got the technology here. We need to. This on, or just?
We have this.
Just that. Okay. So, Violet, let's start out with you. Can you maybe ground our conversation this morning by sharing your thoughts as an Indigenous leader about what the coast means to California coastal tribes in general, and the Chumash, of course, in particular, and what progress and challenges look like to Native peoples in the 21st century?
Sure. Haku. Welcome. Good morning. As Sarah said, my name is Violet Sage Walker, and I am actually a descendant of Avila Beach and the Chumash people of San Luis Obispo County. Previously, many of you might have had the encounter working with my father, Fred Collins. And I would just like to say that we are third generation today in here. I have my nephew with me, advocating for the coast of California as a tribal indigenous group. It's really an honor to be able to sit here with all of you today, with the challenges that California has faced and is going to be facing over the next few years, to just share a story with you. And I think the value that the tribes bring to forums like this is that we can interweave stories and histories and bring a meaning to things that that are sometimes overlooked when we're talking about business and we're talking about the value of the ocean or the value of the coastline or the value of some real estate. We actually would like to give a different perspective on the value of the coast of California, and that is going back, tens and 20,000 years ago. Our people lived on this coast. We walked with the giant sloths that stood 20 feet tall. We lived with mammoths. We hunted and fished off the Channel Islands. We believed that our relatives were the ocean animals, the dolphins and the whales and the otters. We lived in harmony with all these creatures, and we thrived here on the coast of California. And when my dad talks about being sustainable and being good stewards, I always think about sustaining what? And what does sustainability look like? And I want to ask you all to roll back your clock when you talk about sustainability to not the 1960s and not just 50 or 60 years ago, but what sustainability looked like 200 years ago. And my father, in one generation, could drink the water out of the creek in San Luis Obispo. We could walk down to the creek and use a pitchfork and get a steelhead. We could pick clams that were as big as a vehicle. Many of you have seen the big Pismo clams. And in one generation, in not very long, 50 years, 60 years, we've gone from having this mass abundance to having to protect what's left. And that's why we're here, is to protect what's left of what we have of the coastline and to protect what's left of our sacred sites and our language and our heritage and our people. And I just want to, remind you that we're protecting the 1% of what's left. And so being here, being a part of this panel is really important because in my lifetime, I grew up as a child of the 70s. One thing you will maybe remember is the occupation of Point Conception, our most sacred site in the Western Gate, where the Chumash people occupied to keep the liquid natural gas plant from being built there. Chumash people spent over a year on the occupation. And one thing you won't see on the coast of California is a liquefied natural gas plant, and that was something that our people took upon themselves to go and to stay there and protect that land. And it's because of things like that that the Coastal Act and the Coastal Commission and all of the modern environmental policies also had the backing and the support of tribal people. And still to this day, the Coastal Act and the Coastal Commission is still the best way for us to protect our sites along the coast. And so I just wanted to set the stage, thinking back, not just 5 years ago, not just 100, years ago. Think back to what it was like 10,000 years ago. And the people that have lived here, that have always lived here, that call this home, value. And I'm speaking for myself and my family, but I know I'm speaking for a lot of other people, but we value the support of California attorneys and California policy and lawmakers who protect what's sacred to us. It just so happens to be all your favorite places too. So I appreciate being here. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you, Violet, for that. That was a really incredibly moving reminder of the depth of our human connection. And we hear you on where to start the timeline when we talk about successes. So I'm going to have to move that timeline up really quickly. Because Todd, you're the historian on modern, current coastal history.
Yeah, it's not 200 years ago,
Right,
no.
right.
Glorified journalist.
And, so let's talk about sort of coastal protection in the contemporary sense. And that does begin in the 60s and 70s. And when we're talking about the coast, that's Save the Bay and Prop 20. So maybe you could put us in a time machine for a short jaunt back a couple decades. And I just want to remind all of the speakers to please speak into the mic today, because PCL is taping this conference.
Oh, okay.
And they need the audio. So, Todd?
Time machine. So history on a Saturday morning. That's not usually what everyone signs up for, but good morning. I think when we look back at Prop 20, I think we could clearly identify at least two strands of public sentiment that began to rise in the 60s and 70s. And the first, I would say, would be a fear of, generally speaking, what was considered overdevelopment. But I think more accurately, we could probably refine that as poorly planned or unplanned development. And a lot of this type of development was arising and was being driven by a lot of the population booms that we saw in California right after World War II. Between 1940 and 1970, the state's population tripled. I mean, it went from just under 7 million to over 21 million between 1940 and 1970. And this, with this expansion of population, of course, development followed. And so we had like what was, a lot of small towns became cities within this time. Cities began to expand their urban footprint through suburban sprawl, which began a process of creating more towns and more cities. California also became the most populated state, actually, during this time. And this was, a lot of these new developments were all then also connected by, an ever-expanding, system of highways and interstates. So really what this meant for coastal towns was just major plans for development, both that were immediately real and those that were also on the books that were just right around the corner. And I think when we looked at a lot of these developments in retrospect, a lot of them really did not include any type of comprehensive planning at the local level. They did not include any type of environmental sensitivity when we're thinking about sensitive habitats such as wetlands or coastal resources. And they surely didn't really seem to include any type of public input. And so as Bert Muley, who used to teach planning at UC Santa Cruz, used to call them, what you had was just a proliferation of coastal warts up and down the coast, really poor development. So we were building right on the sand. We were having developments that were sealing off miles of coastline and beaches from public access. We were putting polluting industries right in our waterways, right into the coastal zone. We had plans for private beaches, private resorts, high-rise condos, and of course more and more freeways. And so this was really a time where a lot of residents along the coast began to ask the question, like, really, do we have any recourse? Is this really what we want? And a great example of this type of development and also the public reaction to it, I think, was really first seen in the San Francisco Bay. I actually have a slide for that. Right? Where by 1960, I'm sure many people know the story in this room, where the Army Corps of Engineers were essentially saying, like, hey, development is king in California. Let's just go and make the bay a river. And that's going to allow the communities surrounding the bay to pretty much fill in hundreds of square miles to expand their cities and for more development. The public reaction when this was printed in the Oakland Tribune was pretty immediate, and it was largely led by the three women up there from Berkeley that started the Save the Bay, officially it's called Save the Bay Association now, Save San Francisco Bay Association, which was advocating for a regional type of planning. A comprehensive planning that was outside of just local jurisdictions. And that type of advocacy by 1965 resulted in the San Francisco Bay Conservation and Development Commission, BCDC, which to my knowledge was actually one of the first environmental regulatory agencies in the United States. And so that really set the stage, I think, provided a model not only for what later on would become the Coastal Commission, but it also gave, I think, a lot of communities in coastal regions ideas of, like, we need some kind of recourse that was similar. The second kind of public sentiment that was also, I think, a rising that we see within Prop 20 was the rising tide of environmental consciousness. I mean, this was also that began to dovetail, that people began to ask, like, is it okay that we're polluting and putting waste in our bays and estuaries? Is it okay that we're going to take the city's trash on a barge a couple miles offshore and just dump it in the ocean? They started thinking about sensitive habitats, wildlife. They started thinking about, what are we doing, like filling in wetlands and coastal resources?
And there were really spectacular events, right? Spectacular in the worst sense. The Cuyahoga River caught on fire.
Right.
The Santa Barbara oil spill was on everybody's TV every night. I mean, there were some really powerful events that were galvanizing public sentiment at that time.
Right, and I would think I mean, particularly in California, the 1968 oil spill in Santa Barbara, it just galvanized, I think, a whole nother movement and really put that front and center. And so those two public sentiments really, I think, intertwined together by 1970 for proposals in the state legislature to enact some sort of coastal protection, coastal conservation. And of course, every single one of those proposals were strongly opposed by business and did not pass, as you could imagine. And so the primary authors of those, Alan Cerroti and John Dunlap, working with coastal communities and activists, that's when they decided in 1972 to go to the initiative and take the proposals directly to the people. And that's how we got Proposition 20.
So Prop 20, as most of you know, is a ballot initiative that was introduced out of frustration for being unable to get a bill through the legislature. And so, as Todd said, people said, let's try something else. Let's take it to the vote, take it to the ballot box. So, Charles, maybe can you talk a little bit about, and let's open this up to the whole panel, but what did Prop 20 actually do? What was in it and what did it do?
Well, first of all, it's great to be here, see all of you, and thank you, Sarah, and great panelists. Let's not forget the vote. 55% of California voted for Prop 20. All of the coastal counties, except for the 3 northern counties, voted in favor of Prop 20. So it was, in voting terms, it was a pretty overwhelming mandate to protect the coast. But when I talk about Prop 20, I like to highlight two main ideas, which resonate, I think, with PCL and the whole movement towards comprehensive planning. Let's get ahead of the curve of what's happening out there, these warts. And Prop 20 said right in the preamble, the coast belongs to everyone. Pretty fundamental idea. The second idea was, and the reason why we care about it is for present and future residents of California. Didn't use the word generations yet, but we seem to reinvent our recognition of sustainability every decade or so or generation, but this was back in the beginning of Prop 20. Everybody, the coast belongs to everyone, and it's for us and the future. So those two ideas were built right into the text of Prop 20. Prop 20 said, let's put a hold on everything. What's happening right now is not good. We want to stop this overdevelopment, this incremental development, this ad hoc, unplanned activity, and put in place two things. One, a development regulation, interim regulatory process. So it created the California Coastal Zone Conservation Commission, the CCCZC. I think that's why they came up with the CCC eventually. And that commission was put in place to basically regulate development until such time as a plan was created to manage the coast in a better way, a more comprehensive way. So Prop 20 said, go create this commission, go off and create a plan, come up with recommendations for the legislature. This is that plan. It's the California Coastal Plan. I really love this document. It's got state-of-the-art GIS technology in the back.
Right.
It's got all the maps of the coast. You flip out this key here, you can see what all the layers are. Really cutting edge for the time, and this was sort of rooted in the regional planning efforts coming out of Berkeley and a lot of it in California and places like PCL. We need to start planning for our environmental change. So this document was created over 4 years, hundreds and hundreds of public hearings to generate a bunch of stories, in effect, about what is of concern in all of these different places on the coast. And we can come back to it later, perhaps in the conversation, but if you go through here, they are like seeds of, seeds for the future of what we need to care about. And you can go in here and find things that are called out as important resources, like Bolsa Chica, for example, set aside in the coastal plan as a very important wetland that, what should we do? We should protect it and restore it. That became a seed for a lot of activism, a lot of planning, a lot of regulation, and eventually a lot of change that led to that expansion.
That's great, Charles, and it just, such a different world when planning and regulation was really on the rise, right? When it was ascendant principles that seized popular imagination.
So this was handed to the legislature. The regulatory process was, expired under Prop 20. Will end January 1, 77. So it was back to the legislature to do something.
To pass the Coastal Act. So, Todd, before we get into the Coastal Act, just super briefly, can you touch on the few, why did Prop 20 was historic in so many ways, right? Can you just talk about the campaign, what are the key takeaways for you on what brought that campaign home?
Well, as Charles mentioned, 55%, so the Proposition 20 passed by nearly 1 million votes. But I think one of the things that is so amazing about this campaign, I mean, it really was a David versus Goliath type of struggle. I mean, this was a grassroots, scrappy grassroots campaign.
Outspent 10 to 1, right?
Outspent 10 to 1, taking on the who's who of corporate California. And that I would even actually say this is the who's who of the corporate West. I mean, these were nationally recognized corporations, some of the most powerful corporations actually in the nation at that time. And outspent 10 to 1. And so they had to come up with ingenious ways really to move that forward. And I think, when we look at where it passed, so not just in the coastal counties, it passed even in counties in the Central Valley, and even in places where these are Republican strongholds, which back then Republican meant a much different name. I mean, a lot of the Republicans of PCL, right, at that, of that time were actually helping advance this campaign. But in places like Fresno, it passed, and then even in places where maybe it didn't get over 50%, it was still in the high 40 percentile. And so I think really one of the biggest takeaways outside of just an amazing grassroots campaign that had no money. There was no internet, no telephone, or no cell phones, no social media, right? How do you wage a statewide campaign like this is really plugging in to people's love for the coast. And I also think a network along the coast that we're tired of all the coastal warts in the, up and down, that really united and really kind of weaved together that kind of activism. Even today, when I go in a coastal town and conducting oral histories for, the documentary, actually, which you could scan the QR code, it's right there. It actually features two of the people that are up here, and not this old guy. But they tell the stories better than I can. It's every single one could point to a development in their coastal town and say, this is why we have a coastal commission. And they still see that today.
Because they didn't want to see more of that.
Absolutely.
More of the coast, less of the ugly. Okay, so let's move forward now and talk about the Coastal Act itself. As you said, Charles, the temporary commission produced this plan for the legislature to craft a permanent statute out of before the initial commission sunsetted in 1976. And a lot of people thought this was going to be the poison pill, that there was no way that this brand new commission could form itself, do all this regulatory work, and still put this giant plan together and turn it into the legislature in 4 years. There were a lot of people on the other side of that proposition that were assuming that the commission would just go away in 4 years because this was an impossible task. But they were wrong, and the legislature did pass Coastal Act in 76, and now people say, I mean, it's generally recognized, it's the strongest environmental law in the country, if not the world. So, Charles and Susan, you've had the most actual hands-on experience with the law up here on this panel. What's made the Coastal Act so effective? Why has it, up until now, fared so well in comparison to a lot of other environmental laws? What are your thoughts on that?
Do you want it?
Do I?
Well, I think the Coastal Act, the way it's structured, and once you learn how it's enforced, which is through the Coastal Commission, through a very deliberative process. But what makes it so special, I think, is that it has a clear route for public participation and advocacy. I think it's the only, I mean, you have 12 people sitting up there, they're all appointed, but as a member of the public, and when I started, that's all I was. I didn't have an organization, I was a person. And I remember the first time I testified, I was trying to protect, I was trying to stop a project out of the Scripps Institute, which was it was called ATOC, but I won't go into the details. But the first time I testified, my knees were shaking. I was terrified, and I kept talking and not recognizing that I was only supposed to have 3 minutes, and I just went on and on. But the chair was very gracious, but what was so powerful for me was recognizing that because of the law and because of this commission that was assigned to enforce it, the public could really weigh in and stop really terrible projects. And that kind of formed the whole basis for my involvement eventually, as it grew. But I think, that is, I think, the core. And what I see, and I've been to more Coastal Commission meetings in my lifetime than I want to recount, but people go to the commission when they are desperate. They start when a project is small, right? Not necessarily small, but the awareness of how bad a project is very localized. And they go and they try and stop it where they live, and then they find out they can't, because the only one who's really going to enforce a law to protect them is the Coastal Commission.
And why do you think that is, Charles? Why does the commission have such a different approach to these kinds of projects than a lot of other regulatory or local agencies?
Well, first of all, thank you for the 3-minute rule. I wondered where that came from. And you're still a great person. I think a couple things. One of the reasons why the public can do that and engage in that kind of participation and activism is because the Coastal Act took a proposed 160 policies in the coastal plan and distills it down to this, kind of amazing set, Chapter 3 of the Coastal Act, amazing set of broad but powerful policies, and they are broad. They say things like protect wetlands, protect habitat, maximize access. But there are some key nuggets of strength in those policies, like it's not protect wetlands in the CEQA sense, where we're trying to minimize and balance and go to significance. It's you can't fill a wetland unless you're a couple of things, right? If you're not one of those things, you just can't do it. No, finished. Same with habitat. So there was some power in the policy language, but also a lot of broad discretion, ability to make judgments, and so the public can come in and say, you know what, I don't think this project maximizes public access, or there is an access way here that's being blocked. You can't allow that under this broad mandate to protect public access. So that's one thing, the strength and the power of the broad law.
Which is ironic, right? Because the attempts to get the Coastal Act through the legislature were not anywhere near as strong as the final Coastal Act based on the plan.
Well, yes, I also, I think some legal scholars will probably talk to you about how some of the language reflects the compromises of the legislative process. So we can talk about seawalls a little later, and kind of the opposing ideas in the Coastal Act about how to do that. But so the laws were important. Two other things that I would highlight are why it is recognized for its strength and its somewhat uniqueness, but one was that there was a recognition, and goes back to your idea of the legislative process. One of the compromises made was we can have this statewide program, but we're going to implement it through local land use planning and zoning. And so a big part of the Coastal Act is this partnership that's set up, the inherent collaboration between the state and local governments. Every local government must create a local coastal plan that includes land use policies that have the types, kinds, intensities of uses of development in any particular place, and do that in a way that's consistent with the statewide policy. So Every LCP has to be submitted to the Coastal Commission. The Coastal Commission reviews it, approves it as meeting the state law, but then once those are approved, the ability to issue permits goes back to the local government, except below the mean high tide and a few other details. But this collaboration was really critical to getting it out of the legislature into law. The local governments, understandably, were concerned about having a new state agency that's going to oversee what they're doing, especially local land use. And then the last piece was this idea, I think, inherent in what you were saying, Susan, which it's a public law program. So there's a lot of emphasis in the law about public participation. Everything happens in public. There's rules for how the commissioners can behave or not. And one of the interesting, it's a little in the weeds, but the design of the process whereby the professional staff bring recommendations to the commission, the politically appointed commissioners, where all of the politics that we love to hate happens. Those recommendations are brought to the commission in a public forum, and everybody can get that staff report at the same time, read what's going on, read the independent assessment of the staff, and then the commissioners have to think about that in public, deal with it in public.
Right.
And that dynamic between the professional, law-based, fact-based recommendations and the political decision that then is made is really critical, I think, to the public transparency and the ability of people like Susan to go and say, I just read this staff recommendation and it says right here, what do you think about that, right? People have to.
Let's drill down on that a little bit, Charles, because I think a lot of people in this room have had interactions with various state, federal, and local agencies where it has felt, on occasion, like the decision was already baked, like the public hearing process is largely performative. And yes, it's our obligation to go and show up, but that the outcome has already been determined. I think we've all seen instances at the Coastal Commission where there have been some big decisions to make, right? And you don't know what it's truly dramatic because you don't know what the commission's going to do.
Right.
Why is that? Why is that? Why does that only happen at the Coastal Commission and nowhere else?
I'm not sure I know the answer to that, but I can testify to the fact that I literally watched, and Bill White was in the room. Hi. We were fighting the toll road, which was proposed to go through the fifth most popular state park in California. The governor was completely behind it. He tried to change commissioners during the hearing. You can't believe the stuff that goes on, honestly. And, we met with every single commissioner, and we felt we did not have any of the governor's appointments, which were 4. And so, but I watched commissioners change their mind during the hearing. People who were going to vote yes to approve it ended up voting no. So, and the funniest part was Vanessa, who is the administrative person, counts the votes, and she reports it back, and one commissioner, I will not name said commissioner, voted no, and she went, no? And so it was real, so that can really happen. And I've watched it happen multiple times, so on big fights. But anyway, so I think it's that feeling that we're never, on the advocacy side, we're never going to have a level playing field. It's just not going to happen. These developers, whatever realm they come from, they have much more money. They have, they have teams of attorneys. We're never going to have that. They can wage big media campaigns. We don't have money like that, so we have to be smarter. We have to be accurate. We can never misrepresent anything or be sloppy, as some of my opponents have done. And I love when they do that, because I get to point it out. But we have passion on our side. And we have diligence, and we have some great attorneys. We need more. But anyway, I kind of think,
We hear all the time, oh, it's the commission, they're an independent commission. What does that mean, Charles? What is an independent commission? The appointing structure?
Generally, when we say that, we mean that the appointing structure has 3 appointing authorities. The governor is the four appointees that you may or may not get, and then the appointments from the Assembly and the Senate. So unlike Department of Parks and Rec or Fish and Wildlife, the governor doesn't directly control the executive director, who we have here today. Kate Huckelbridge is up here from the Coastal Commission. The governor doesn't directly control what Kate does, although he does have some purse strings.
right.
You know, there are 8 other commissioners that also are important to those decisions, and so that's mostly what we mean by the independence of the commission. It's a commission that can make an independent decision regardless of direction from the executive branch.
Right.
Not that there isn't direction from the executive branch, but they don't have to follow it.
Right. I do think that's the big difference, is that it's not run like another agency where the executive branch has significant control and expects people to, walk a certain line. This is very different. We also have 6 members out of the 12 are public appointments. So there's 6 local electeds from districts, starting from one end to the other of the state, and then the 6 public members. And so that's a mix that also protects some of, what the public is seeking to achieve there.
And that mix was also a function of that compromise in the legislature, where we want statewide presence, but local government has half the votes.
You mentioned the toll roads, Susan. Let's talk about some of the big marquee accomplishments that have happened, not just because of the Coastal Act, but the big coastal wins, right? I think, Charles, this is where you take that slide. Susan, you mentioned can't really see the screen.
So I picked out some of the projects that I've worked on. And so these are the 4. So first was the Hearst Ranch. And this is really, I think, I think everybody, go to the next slide, please. Okay. I think, how many people in this room have gone to the San Simeon coastline, whether you've gone to the, yeah. Everybody goes there. I went there. And it was really what inspired me, because the coastline, I come from Philadelphia, and outside Philadelphia, New York, and this coastline, when I saw it, and I always loved the ocean, I went, oh my God, this is extraordinary. Well, it was so extraordinary that the Hearst Corporation wanted to take what you're looking at right there and develop 4 resorts, most in the viewshed. They wanted to take one of the last coastal bluffs that had any land and put a 27-hole golf course. They wanted to widen the highway and put stoplights. I mean, and they wanted to severely restrict public access. And so this was a massive fight. Everybody, I mean, there were a number of big power players who were involved with the Hearst Corporation, who stacked the room with union members. I mean, it was one of the most intense hearings I've ever been at. But in the end, the commission voted to amend the LCP. Well, in short form, they denied the project as proposed. And it was a huge win for the public. And because of that, eventually the Hearst Corporation backed away from their desire. They wanted initially to build a city there, a new city. So that decision allows you to have that today.
And Peter used to say, Peter Douglas also had a fabulous saying, which is, the biggest successes under the Coastal Act are the things that you don't see, right? The wetlands that didn't get filled,
right,
and the Monterey pine forest that didn't get cut down for the sake of a golf course. And I think that's why it's so important to have these conversations, because if you don't know the history, like if you're just driving through northern San Luis Obispo County on your way to Big Sur, you're like, oh, isn't this nice? California's so nice. Look at all this beautiful view shed. You don't know that people bled out of their tear ducts for years.
To stop that, it's true. It's
To
true.
keep that alive. Violet, I'm curious if something comes to mind for you along those lines of you live in a pretty incredible stretch of the coast.
Right, and so everything that, Susan was saying earlier about this intense public forum, that you can actually go, sometimes this is our last option, the Coastal Commission hearings, and this is our, we're a small tribe, unfunded, no federal funding. All of our work that we've ever done has been on donations and philanthropy, and so when we are facing these corporations, whether it's, Unocal or, Chevron or the decommissioning of Diablo Canyon, you're going up against, the Goliaths and off-road vehicles.
You've got a big one of those in your backyard.
So I think about that we could walk into a room and change the mind of people that maybe had that hard no. And at the end, I'll just give you an example of when my father, one of his passions was closing down off-road vehicle access in the Oceana Dunes, and he had a massive heart attack 4th of July about 4 or 5 years ago. You probably remember the meeting was at Embassy Suites in San Luis, and it was one of the meetings to hear the hearing about off-road vehicles. And he went in and he was like public enemy number one, walking in there, and he had just walked out of the hospital. He said, if I'm not dead, can you take me to the Coastal Commission hearing? And so we did. We dressed him up, we tied a suit, we put his clothes on, and we went from French Hospital to the Coastal Commission hearing. And we wheeled him down to the front. You were there, you saw it, and he spoke, and the decision was made that day to close down the beach to off-road vehicles. And one of the commissioners, I'm not sure which one, I should look it up, but said that one of the single most significant things was the testimony of my father, which makes us like the target of every off-road vehicle person in the whole California. But aside from that one person could go and change the mind and do something this massive and make a difference with no representation, no lawyers, no money, just himself, his energy, his passion, and his storytelling changed the mind and made that decision, which we know now is being contested. But you know what? I'm still here. And so one person can make the difference, and that's the thing I like the most about the Coastal Commission and the Coastal Act is that they will listen to public comment and they will take into account and they will change their minds. And it may be exciting, and it may be contentious, and it may be it seems like unsurmountable odds that we go against, but we win, and we win because the coast of California looks the way it does, so that is a win. Hearst Castle is, Chumash land, and if it wasn't for the Coastal Act and the Coastal Commission, they would have destroyed our sites there too. So.
Yeah, and that's a great, the Oceano example is a great illustration of why the coast is always being saved, because as you noted,
Yeah,
that's still.
and why we can never take it for granted that this is safe.
Susan, I think you want to give us one more example?
Sure. Well, I might want to give you two, but, okay, so when you were talking, Violet, when you were talking about liquefied natural gas, so that was many years ago. Well, they came back. And I don't know if people remember this, but there were about 5 proposals to build liquefied natural gas terminals along the coast of California. Some environmentalists actually believed that we should be doing that because gas would be better than oil. But there was no planning process for any of it. The one that got the farthest was by BHP Billiton, and they, at the time, were the largest mining company in the world. Mostly their Australian faction was the one who was advancing this proposal. The governor endorsed it early. That was Schwarzenegger, again. But so what they wanted to do was more this floating 3 football fields long, 14 stories high, permanently off Oxnard and Malibu. Permanently. And then they would get tankers to come in and offload the liquefied natural gas, which is not just like, natural gas is, that word natural is really kind of a misnomer, but especially when you're talking about liquefied natural gas, because there's the potential for catastrophic accident in that process. We just knew that the pollution, they were going to become the largest polluter in Ventura County. And so this was a massive effort. We had a lot of assistance, actually from Pierce and Keely Brosnan, who got involved and and we married the 2 communities of Oxnard and Malibu together. And that was actually a beautiful thing to see. Because they had been fighting ideas like this for years and years and years, but nobody was really listening to them. In Oxnard. Right. So this was, I think at the hearing, I can't remember how many, at least probably 1,000 people at the hearing. It was an amazing project. It took about 4 years, but in the end, the commission and the State Lands Commission both voted to deny it. And you don't have any LNG terminals off the California coast now.
You hear a story like that now and you think, oh my God, that could never happen. I'm here to tell you, that could happen. That could have already happened.
Right.
I mean, these aren't just like...
It was like a gold rush, but it was an LNG rush.
This is why we need to have constant vigilance. And stuff like this, the only answer is to just stop it, to say no.
Yeah.
There's other times where the Coastal Commission gets branded with that. Like, oh, you can't get anything approved by the Coastal Commission. Oh, they denied it. Not true. That's absolutely not true. The Coastal Commission denies stuff like this if people work really, really, really hard to make it happen. But more than 95% of what comes to the Coastal Commission gets approved. And sometimes there's certain negotiations because there has to be a compromise because what's being proposed isn't going to meet the legal statutory requirements of the Coastal Act, but there's a project there and we can find a way through. Todd, you've got some examples of some compromises of developments that have happened, but that look very, very different from how they would have looked if they'd been approved as initially submitted.
Yeah, when I was at Stanford, I was a historian working with social scientists who are a lot more useful in this than old historians looking at documents. And so I had the privilege of working with what I had nicknamed some quantitative wizards, and who were able to actually look at over 2 decades worth of coastal commissions. They data mined it, and were able to analyze that to find out that it was right into the 90th percentile. Over that time of projects that were actually approved, and most of which were approved with amendments. And this is where the compromises would come in, which amendments that were looking at scenic views, that were taking sensitive habitats, but also more importantly, that were also mandating projects to have coastal access, and which are really the 3 key, I think, as Charles was saying, one of the 3 main 3 principles that we see in the Coastal Act that a lot of the projects are judged against. And even going back into the late 1970s, that you could see that the commission was already operating within this realm. Avco and the Irvine Company, both here in Orange County, had massive projects that were already actually underway when Prop 20 began. And it took them years to actually reach a settlement with that. And what allowed the companies to actually build, and a lot of these times, so you went from developments that were building right on the beach, that were going to be cutting off coastal access, private beach, private golf courses, private resorts. There was, I think, Avco wanted a 12-story condominium that was going to pretty much look like Miami Beach there in Orange County. Some gated communities. And a planner named Ronnie Rogers was the one who was hired, and he actually he became a coastal commission groupie, is what he called himself. And he sat in like meetings after meetings to figure out how's this going to work, which I mean, a lot of planners actually did with CEQA, right, in 1970, to really actually sit in to see like, this is exciting, how's this actually going to operate? And so what ended up happening was a lot of in those two developments, they were scaled down, and they had public access. We had public parks. There were going to be no private beaches, no private resorts. And the same thing by 1980. Oh, actually, I would actually, since we're maybe housing maybe on the topic, we should also say that the Coastal Commission, because it was before 1981, actually mandated in both of those projects that you were going to have low and moderate income housing in both of those projects, in Irvine and Avco.
Thank you for making that point, Todd. I really appreciate that.
For Sea Ranch was another example of that, right? So it was going to be a 10-mile stretch, gated community, no public access. I think it was going to be about 1,500 units in that, which were beautifully designed.
Yes.
You know, Halprin designed. I mean, they're gorgeusly designed, but they were all going to be on septic tanks. And they were also going to be pulling water from the local river. And they also, I think they planted along Highway 1, they planted like 250,000 trees. And so the settlement on that was they cut down the units, mostly because the soil man there was going to be no way that you were going to be able to maintain any kind of sustainable existence of that many units with septic tanks. And that's something where, I mean, again, planners, this is where planning comes in, because you're looking at the long run. Right? A developer would have built that and say, well, that's going to be a problem 15 years down the road.
So these are great examples of how the commission has, or the Coastal Act's regulatory process has been successfully engaged to stop bad projects and to improve projects that could go forward. But the planning side of the Coastal Act is maybe less well understood or appreciated. And Charles, I think you've got some examples of some of the planning successes.
Sure. And just before I do that, everything you're hearing about now, they're all nuggets in this plan.
You brought props.
So you can see the discussions of the Hearst Ranch and the open space and the 70,000 units they wanted to build there in the general plan of San Luis Obispo County.
And also the discussions of affordable housing.
Affordable housing, well, yeah, we can talk about that.
Yeah.
And it's also the things you do see, Sarah. And so one of the first decisions for lower cost visitor serving was the denial of the demolition of, forgetting the name, the cabins down there on the shelf there in Marin County as you're coming over the.
Oh, is that rock?
Cabins like you see them from the
Yeah, I would
Highway
say it's
1 as you're
Rock
looking
Point,
down
but
there. Yeah.
that's not- that's not it.
Anyway, those were going to be demolished, and the Conservation Commission under Prop 20 denied the demolition so they could be restored and made into lower cost visitor serving. So it was a regulatory decision to keep something.
Nice.
Anyway, so I do think in the big picture, one of the successes of the planning ethic of the Coastal Act and the Coastal LCP program has been this emphasis on urban-rural boundaries. We were hearing about sprawl in the 40s, 50s, 60s, and so the Coastal Act said we need to concentrate new development in existing developed areas. You need to maintain Highway 1 as a rural 2-lane scenic road in rural areas. That's been a big constraint on, say, expanding the freeway up through Marin and Sonoma into Mendocino County or Big Sur Coast. These constraints to say we want to keep what we have in the rural and scenic areas and develop in the urban areas. So these are some examples. This is Cambria in 1972. The LCP, the Local Coastal Program, set an urban-rural boundary there on the right. And then 40 years later, you see there's been a lot of infill development, but we don't have any development outside the urban area. This is Dillon Beach in Marin County, 1972. 40 years later, same footprint, essentially, of the community. More dense, but same footprint. Cayucos, San Luis Obispo, 40 years later. Pismo Beach, 40 years later. And so you look at our coastline, and basically north of Santa Barbara, the urban footprints are essentially the same as they were 50 years ago, for the most part. Southern California was pretty much already determined what the development pattern was going to be, other than the Irvine Coast, where there was the nugget in here that said, save the Irvine Coast, and there was a lot of compromises that went into that to protect what you do see there that's not developed. But that idea of concentrating development was really critical, and it's not rocket science. The plans say, here's the urban-rural boundary. You can build over here, and you can't build over here. And what was the magic? Oh, well, you followed the plan, right? Instead of saying, oh, we can let another one through, and it's not a big deal. Going back to your Hearst Ranch example, and I think this is true up and down the coast, because of the strong enforcement of that approach and the plans, you basically change the real estate markets over the long run. So the Hearst Ranch conservation easement happened because the Coastal Commission said no, the politics shifted, the real estate market shifted, people put together a coalition to buy out those interests. So now it's permanently protected through conservation easements. Those of you who know the San Mateo County coast and the peninsula, you know how much open space there is from like the post efforts, the Mid-Peninsula Open Space Trust, all of that land. I often start a talk by saying, how do we have this 40-mile stretch between Half Moon Bay and Santa Cruz with no development on the shoreline, really? State parks, natural resources, open space. How did that happen when you have 8 million people 20 miles away over the hill? Well, we said, no, we're not going to develop the rural lands. We're going to save the ag lands. And the markets changed. Organizations like Post emerged, and they could fundraise in Silicon Valley and buy that stuff up and protect it.
These are just such great examples, you guys. I really, honestly, we could fill the day with examples. It's truly spectacular what's been able to be accomplished in the last 50 years. But no law is flawless. No program is so great that it can't be improved. That's the case for the Coastal Act as well. I wonder, what do you all see as the weak links or room for improvement, or what's missing in the Coastal Act? If you could wave a magic wand, what would you do?
Here's my magic wand. The original Coastal Act had affordable housing policy written into it. And local governments and developers did not like that. And they lobbied incessantly from the time it passed until 1981, when the Mello Act was approved. So the commission, who had been actively protecting and encouraging and incentivizing the provision of affordable housing, that policy was taken out. And the commission no longer had the ability to protect and preserve and encourage affordable housing. Now, you might think that sounds a little strange, because if you're seeing some of the news or active in the legislature, a lot of people like to say that it's the Coastal Commission that is blocking the reason we don't have affordable housing in the coastal zone. And honestly, this makes me crazy, because if I know in my heart that the only way to get affordable housing in the coastal zone, one of the most valuable real estate markets in the world, is if you have a commission that's going to require it, because no one's going to do it out of the goodness of their heart, with the exception of a few people who are kind of developer activists who really care about this issue. So for me, I would love to see something happen. I don't know what it's going to look like, but I feel the commission really needs to have that role, because there's many people who are dedicated to increasing affordable housing in the coastal zone. And I personally feel it's completely inappropriate for anybody to blame the Coastal Commission and the Coastal Act for the situation we have now. So that's where I think things, my my big thing about improving the coastal.
I wish I could bestow upon you that magic wand, Susan. I would if I
I
could.
think that is one of the biggest weaknesses of the act, is that we've seen the gentrification of the coastline. It's not accessible to folks of all income levels. And so the one addition I would make is that in my collection of nuggets here, this policy of affordable housing is not an affordable housing policy under the coastal plan. It's a public access policy. And the coastal plan says very clearly, you need to create opportunities for persons of all income levels to live near the coast, recognizing that access wasn't like about getting a shuttle or a train from the valley out to the coastline. It was about being able to live along and in the coastal zone. So all of us should be able to do that, and that's why that policy's in there, not for some affordability housing policy reason.
Per se. You know, so far we've been focusing on the Coastal Act, but, you know, there's a lot of other really important laws that come to bear. A lot of them are federal laws. And Violet, you have just come off an incredible victory working with working with the Biden and the Newsom administration to, well, I'm going to, if there's anyone in this room who doesn't know what she just did, I'm going to let you tell it.
Sure. So actually, we made a video that could tell a little bit more to those who are not as familiar with what we had just done. And I would just like to say that it was not just me. It started before I was born. And the Coastal Act and Prop 20 was before I was born. So just to be fair, this is affecting and a tool that I have used in my life to get one of the most spectacular accomplishments of my whole life. Maybe, I don't know how I will top this, but I've been thinking of ways. But this is a tool that was created before I was born that we were able to use to get to where we are today. And, you know, we talked about what policies within the Coastal Act could potentially be improved, and we said affordable housing and things like that. But I will say that tribal engagement is something that has been consistent over the period of the last, since before I was born in the 70s, and tribal engagement is growing every year thanks to our leadership and our formal federal partners, which I hate to say, but people like Deb Haaland and people who have set the bar really high for tribal engagement. I'm going to deeply miss the importance of tribal engagement in at the highest level. And so I would like to just say that this accomplishment started long before I was born. It started back in the 60s with the Union oil spill on the coast of Santa Barbara. And our people have been fighting for the coast of California, maybe not, maybe behind the scenes, maybe unbeknownst to the public, but we have been here, we have always been here, and we've always been advocating for the coast. And this is just the result of the last 10 years of my life and my dad's, and going back 3 generations. So let's play this video real quick.
Okay.
For so long, this sanctuary was just a twinkle in the eye of the Central Coast, an idea that many had, including those who are no longer with us. But it is said, if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. Today we celebrate that we went together to make this dream into a reality.
The legacy that we want to leave behind is one of protecting our sacred places, protecting our heritage, our culture, and our animal relatives. And today is the first ocean protection in nearly 30 years for national marine sanctuaries. 30 years this has been in the making.
I imagine I speak for most of us here when I say my heart is full today of gratitude and appreciation for those of you who have been working for decades to make this day happen.
With this designation, we are honoring the ancestors and descendants of the people who stewarded these lands and water since time immemorial.
This is the first sanctuary ever nominated by a tribe, but not the last. I feel like this is something that we gave birth to, and I feel like it's our baby and our child. And I feel like today is a big day that like your child goes to school and you're seeing him off into the world and you're hoping for their safe return. And today I am gifting our baby to Noah. Please take care of it. We would like it back in one piece. We would like it to be whole all the way to the Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary. Every day I just wish my dad was here and I could tell him that we did it.
In my lifetime, to be able to see something like that happen, to see something preserved, you know, having grown up with the oil spills that we've experienced in Santa Barbara, and to see the wildlife that does come up, to hopefully have an end to all that. I was so excited. I was so happy to think that the kids that are growing up now will not see what we saw. They won't know anything different, and that's how it should be.
The team is looking down the barrel of a 4:55 meeting.
Violet, I think I speak for everyone in this room and everyone in this state when we say thank you for your service.
You may have given it to Noah, but the next 4 years, co-parenting is going to be really important.
Yeah, co-parenting.
Yeah.
Well, nobody's asked me what I was going to do now because I'm currently unemployed. So I just love the Oceano Dunes. So yeah, I'm unemployed and I have very few skills.
Yeah.
But I will say that that this was an example of something that people wanted and the California voters wanted, but it was the tribe that took this over the finish line. Mm-hmm. And it was that one little magic sauce that the tribe is the reason why it got the momentum it did. And a lot of people tried before. A lot of people, if you remember, this was originally in the Monterey Bay original proposals to go all the way down to the Santa Barbara Channel. Leon Panetta and them, they advocated for this long ago. And so I will say that we had a lot of support, but the magic was that we were in an environment and the perfect combination of the governor, the federal government, leaders like Deb Haaland, leaders like Wade Crowfoot, leaders like in the Coastal Commission, and all of the people came together in this perfect minute that we were able to take advantage. And if we were a month later, we would not have this marine sanctuary.
Yeah, it's true.
One month later,
it's true.
It would not be here.
Timing is everything.
And people really worked they worked magic. Mm-hmm. And I'll tell you, I had the White House and people on speed dial, people were calling me. They're like, can you do this? I'm like, can I do that? How can I negotiate between all three offshore wind leaseholders, BOEM and the White House? And they're like, can you please do it? I'm like, okay, yeah. I'll do it. I'm like on my couch with my phone, and what we did was miraculous. Mm-hmm. And the trust that the state representatives, our local leaders, federal representatives had in me, that we would see this through, is something I can't even begin to express my gratitude towards. And that is something that I've grown up with, watching my father, watching people go to our local electeds and tell our stories, why this is important, why we should protect it, why we should all care about it. And that's, the Coastal Plan was that. It was a book of stories of why we should care about things. And I swear my dad had that thing memorized. He had his little tabs, just like Charles, and he had his little sticky notes, and he would sit there at his desk and he would read it and reference it. And so it has given me a platform. It has given tribal people a platform that we never had. And it's essential and critical to protect Prop 20 and the Coastal Commission, because sometimes that's our last line of defense. And I just want to say this is the result of probably the most fun the Coastal Commissioners have ever had. If you go back and read, if you go back and listen to them on the last final vote to support the Chumash Sanctuary, every single one of them unanimously voted to support it and had something to say, a personal story about why they cared about this. And I just want to say, not all their jobs are great, and not every day is great, but this was great for all of California, all of our people together that worked on this. You know, it was a miracle. It was in the last minute, you know, 1 second to 12, and we would have, you know, not got this. So it was a miracle this happened, and thanks to the Coastal Commission and commissioners and all of our local electeds, all of our state electeds. I just can't tell you how surprised I am that this happened under the wire and with not a minute to spare, and led by a tribe, unfunded, with $0 public dollars going into this for 10 years. Yeah. So this was funded by private money.
We know you, Violet, and we are not surprised.
Yeah. So,
while we're on the topic of federal laws, there's another federal law that's been in the news recently. A lot of people may never have heard of it until recently, but it's well known to those who follow the Coastal Commission, and that's the Coastal Zone Management Act, the CZMA. Charles, can you just really briefly, this is really a critical thing to understand right now, folks, because this is one of the federal laws that is coming under attack by the new administration. And it's one of those federal laws like the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act. People are really familiar with that. They're very much less familiar with the Coastal Zone Management Act. So Charles, can you give us a little primer on that, and then maybe you and Susan can say what's at stake.
So Coastal Zone Management Act was 1972, so it came out with all of the environmental legislation of the early 70s. It basically sets out some broad principles for coastal zone management, planning, information, assessment. It's not a set of mandates per se, but it's broad directions to coastal states. Most of the coastal states, I think Alaska bagged out, and I don't think they've rejoined, but most of the coastal states and the Great Lakes states are participants. They get a lot of funding. Coastal Commission over the years has gotten millions of dollars from the federal government to support its program. And once you get your state program, like the Coastal Act, in California, it's the Coastal Commission, BCDC, which is San Francisco Bay, and the State Coastal Conservancy are all CZMA agencies. Once that program was certified by NOAA under the CZM, then they become eligible for funding. And they also get this magical thing called Federal Consistency Review Authority, which is the ability to review federal actions or decisions, permitting decisions for other private activities that might need a federal approval, review those for consistency with the state law. So all of the work that California's done over the years for offshore oil development, for example, or LNG, or the toll road was partly a federal action for the highway piece.
Offshore wind.
Offshore wind. All of that comes under that ability to review federal things that are happening outside of 3 miles. So our state waters go to, the coastal zone goes to 3 miles. Beyond that is federal waters. If you want to build a platform out there or have a windmill, you got to get a certification from the Coastal Commission. If you want to build a border fence, you got to get approval from the Coastal Commission, although that can be easily overridden with a national security override.
And it's interesting. It's very unique because the concept of federal preemption, usually the feds preempt everything. If the state wants to, whatever the Fed wants to do, the state doesn't have anything to say about it, except in this one particular law, the CZMA, that gives the state, through the CZM agencies, the authority to ensure, to the extent that that is possible, that these activities are consistent with our state laws and our state values. And so it's been, the CZMA has been responsible for a lot of California's signature environmental and coastal wins over the years. But it's one of those laws that's kind of in the crosshairs right now. And I don't know, Susan, do you have any thoughts on that particular
I
thing?
do. Well, I'm going to just cut to the chase here. I think we're coming through a number of years of a very anti-regulatory mood. Not just, what we're seeing now at the national level, but, attacks on CEQA, attacks on the Coastal Act, exemptions from the Coastal Act. This is like, let's fix the problem, let's just not give them any authority over anything at all. I mean, that's kind of where it's been going, and it's like the easy fix, but it doesn't actually fix anything, in my opinion. But so we've been riding that wave for a while, but now we have a really intensely hostile federal administration. And the Coastal Commission and the Coastal Act is in Trump's crosshairs. He said it outright yesterday once he landed in California. So what that means, he's actively calling for the Coastal Commission to be abolished. What that means is that the Coastal Act does not get enforced if it even remains on the books in its current form. So this is, I think, in all the years, and I've been doing coastal protection work for 30 years, this is the most serious threat I have seen. And my concern is we could really lose this law. I've never seen it this fragile. I've never seen an attack so intense. And I guess, so my message to all of you is advocacy is the only way we're going to resist this. It's the only way. And it has to be organized. It has to be intense. We have to get the public to understand what's really at risk here, because the consequences could really be terrible. Just, it's offshore oil. It's taking away the commission as a whole. So development, public access, the only reason you get to go to the beach is because of the Coastal Commission enforcing the Coastal Act. If that's gone, you can say goodbye to that. That's what's really at risk here. So that's my plea, and I wanted to fit it in before we were done.
Existential threats come from all directions. Some of them are political, some of them are more natural in nature. Charles, you're one of the leading thinkers and researchers right now in the area of sea level rise. And I wonder if you have any thoughts about how California should be thinking about and approaching rising sea levels in the coming years. And I just got a note from our sponsors to please speak into the mic. You can move it around. Like if you face this direction, you can move the mic.
So sea level rise, it's happening. It's going to get worse. I do think, in addition to lack of affordable housing now and some other things, one of the relative weaknesses of the coastal laws has been this issue of shoreline erosion. The law basically says two things. One, new development should be planned and located, designed in a way to be safe, minimize hazards, and not ever need a seawall. So that's in the law. But it also says existing structures may be entitled to a seawall if they are in danger and they otherwise mitigate their adverse effects. So it says two things, and it's been very difficult for the Coastal Commission to stop seawall development where there have been existing development patterns. In effect, a lot of Southern California, San Diego, coastline, Los Angeles, Ventura, wherever you've got these highly urbanized shorelines, it's been hard to stop seawall development. The problem with seawalls, and this is just one example of there are many examples out there, is that when you build a seawall on an eroding shoreline, you're going to lose the beach in front of it because of something called passive erosion. This is one of my favorite examples. You see the beach on the upper left there on 1972, a lateral connected sandy beach in front of those residential lots. Below in the center is today, essentially, where the houses on either side of that beach you see in the middle have built revetments to protect their property. The shoreline has progressed inland. There's no lateral access or beach in front of those homes, but where the beach has been able to continue to, where the shoreline's been able to erode, the beach continues, and that's because it's an equilibrium space between the ocean and the back of the beach, and most of our shoreline is eroding, so all things being equal, the beaches move back in equilibrium with that. If we stop that, we're going to have problems, and that's what we're beginning to see. And then the big issue that has been on my mind for at least 10 years now is, as Todd was talking about, most of the Commission's good work comes through conditions on permits, not through denials, but through restrictions on approvals. And this is just one example of all the access dedications that were required through permit actions in Malibu. All those colored rectangles are restrictions on the houses that were built or redeveloped along the Malibu shoreline that said, in exchange for your permit, you will dedicate public access between your property and the mean high tide line to the public. That's what those are, essentially. The red circles are just identifying that they all extend to the mean high tide line, right? So the public space was defined to go from the house to the mean high tide. Below the mean high tide is already ours. I can talk for hours about that if you want. You all own that land, so keep that in mind. So that space, what's going to happen to that space with sea level rise? We spent 40, 50 years battling for all of that access, and with sea level rise, it's going to go underwater. USGS projects about 2/3 of our beaches in Southern California, lacking anything to the otherwise, are going to be gone because of sea level rise by 2100. This is one example of a projection. The shoreline today is the white line. This is Del Mar. The yellow line is where they project the shoreline to be, and by shoreline they mean the mean high tide, with 100 centimeters of sea level rise, 1 meter of sea level rise. Latest projections, that could be anywhere from 2075 to 2050 in that range, depending on what, our emissions. So you can see if those houses are still there in 2100, there isn't going to be any beach. This is that beach today, or a couple years ago at a king tide, and Del Mar, in their LCP efforts, have been trying to establish a policy of a walkable beach. Being able to go down to their beach and walk on it is very important to them and to all of us. But you can see today, at the highest of tides, you can barely do that now. So what's it going to look like in another 25 years, another 50 years with sea level rise? So I think, for all of you who want to keep protecting the coast, this is like the place to focus, which is how is our shoreline going to change with sea level rise and the ways we choose to adapt or not. And this is just one last example from some visioning that's been going on in the city of Monterey. They have a beach there that is a very popular and important place. It's a public beach park. This is one vision of what to do with the erosion, build a seawall. We will, as imagined in this scenario, this will protect the recreational access, the vehicle access, but we'll lose the beach. But you will protect property, and there are some benefits to it. Well, what if we had a different vision of how to adapt, and we let the ocean come in and take back the original connection to the lagoon that was there? This is an imagined new shoreline. It says, oh, you'll have 2+ miles of new coastline and bike trails. Right? So how we choose to intervene along our shorelines and adapt to these things that are going to happen. We could stop emitting today, and it's still going to happen. Hundreds of years of sea level rise will happen. So the question is, what kinds of shorelines do we want? What kinds of coastlines do we want in our local communities? And then doing the hard work of making those decisions together, because it's pretty contentious. I know there's some folks from Pacifica in the audience today, and they can tell you about that. It's difficult to figure out. So I think that's where a lot of the action's going to be, assuming the law survives. You know, there's that, but you know, we need to start spending more time on that.
It's interesting that you started this visual presentation with the aerial photo of Carbon Beach in Malibu. I know that you chose those slides several weeks ago, but that slide, that aerial would look very different today. A lot of those homes are gone now from the fires that just ravaged that area. Yeah. So, you know, that's going to be, these are some of the things that we need to be thinking about as we're also talking about how to rebuild the Los Angeles.
And there's serious trade-offs. I mean, we're not going to move San Francisco Airport in the next 50 or 75 years, and they've already decided that, right? They're going to elevate it. They're going to build a higher wall around the perimeter. Yeah. So what happens in San Francisco Bay is going to be a function of how we decide to collectively armor or not that shoreline. Just a month ago or so, BCDC adopted a new regional shoreline adaptation plan for the next iteration of how to protect the bay.
It's just an interesting dynamic. I mean, the coastal zone as a habitat is a very dynamic environment. But the politics and the policies around the coastal zone are also a very dynamic environment. And when we talk about sea level rise, it's really balancing the private interests, which are very real and legitimate interests. Everybody wants to protect their home. There's no question. We all can relate to that. That's a very understandable instinct. It's balancing that with the broader public questions, right, of where scant public resources should be invested in terms of funding and planning, and what the broader public interest is in these outcomes versus the individual private interest. So it's just, if you're ever bored, come work for the Coastal Commission. So we did want to save a few minutes for questions today. We've got about 15 minutes left. I'm not sure who's going to be, I'm not sure if we even have any questions, but if we do, who's going to be running the mic around? Looks like Howard volunteered. Thank you, Howard.
Good morning. Thank you very much for a wonderful presentation. I heard a couple years ago from a very well-known developer's lawyer that he and his community were really excited about what type of private property right decisions they could be expecting from the new majority on the Supreme Court. And, in terms of, what people are going to be able to push back on in terms of Coastal Commission jurisdiction and, their arguments regarding private property rights. So do any of you have any comments on what might likely be coming down in that regard and what kind of problems they might present?
You're the lawyer, Charles. You get that one. I'm not a lawyer.
But you play one on TV. Yeah. One thing I would say is, like, if you can avoid going to the court, do that. So you're right. It's going to be challenging, I think, if certain critical questions make their way to the U.S. Supreme Court. But it's complicated. I would defer to some of the law professors in the room to really dig into that question. But one of the areas I've been working on a lot in the last several years and speak about sometimes is the idea of the public trust doctrine. And this relates to sea level rise because, as I alluded to, below the mean high tide line is basically our land, public trust land. There's legal doctrines that apply and intended to protect the stewardship values of those tide lands for the public in perpetuity, including like public access and ecological benefits, recreational benefits, and other uses of those tide lands. But as that line goes inland with sea level rise, that land is going to move inland. And so places like, not this section of Malibu, but eventually, where you've got development right on the beach, that tide line is going to come up to that development, and we're going to have an intersection of public tide land property rights and private property rights, or upland public rights. And so that's one of the areas that I think about in terms of the law, which is what happens when we begin to have effectively private trespass on public tide lands. And there is a case in the Ninth Circuit, Federal Ninth Circuit, that talks about the common law doctrines of how we have when you have a shared ambulatory boundary, the rights and obligations are on both sides, and that one side can't stop the line from ambling without permission from the other side. So I wonder how that might play out in places like California when folks who are, early in their careers begin to think about legal issues and bringing cases forward and ask, hey, is that house trespassing on my beach? And there is discussion in the law about how, the original bundle of rights, your entitlements as a matter of property law, go back to the common law, and the idea that the public trust is one of those exceptions. So if you get into that situation, it's not going to be a takings necessarily, because that public trust is built into the inherent property relationships between the private and the public. So it's a little technical, but I'd be really interested to see how a case like that might turn out, because Scalia, one of our great conservative justices, was kind of the leader on that idea that go back to these original common law entitlements, like the public trust. And so I don't know how that might
He didn't
turn
mean
out.
that one. He wasn't talking about that one.
Anyway, I think there's a lot of legal conflict in our future, potentially, unless we decide to take a different tack, which in my view has always been, let's do the community level planning, let's figure out how to solve these shoreline conundrums together in a way that does make difficult trade-offs, does strike a balance between all of the interests, but avoids that fight, which could get pretty gnarly, and I don't know how it would turn out.
Yeah.
Professor Frank, you're training some new constitutional attorneys, right?
Yes. Thank you very much. I was excited to hear your examples of Moss Beach and Monterey, showing a viaduct even being proposed. The example I want to raise, though, doesn't involve necessarily a public protection versus private development, and it was the loss of the Surfliner service connecting San Diego with San Luis Obispo at San Clemente in January of 2023, and it was just restored last March. Was the Coastal Commission involved in making recommendations for that, essentially a seawall?
I didn't work directly on that issue, and it's a very complicated one, because you have the public that still wants access and people who don't want to move the train line, and it's in a very vulnerable, precarious situation. But Sarah, you might know, I know the Coastal Commission was involved, but you had a number of agencies all involved in trying to figure out a solution there.
Yeah, my goal here is not to be the one answering questions, but I'll just very briefly answer that one. The low sand corridor that you referred to, much if not all of it is in the coastal zone. There's a patchwork history of, armoring on that line. And yes, the Coastal Commission is involved. And to Charles's point, we're trying to keep it open while everyone understands that it needs to move. It can't stay where it is. So the planning effort of that, I hope, Kate, nod or shake your head. Okay, I got the thumbs up from my boss. So yes, we're involved.
Sorry.
And we need to do more planning, and we're working on it.
But as someone who's no longer inside the Coastal Commission, that planning is really critical. And right now, in that case, they are talking about moving the rail line in some segments. It's a 10-year plus billions of dollars plan to relocate the whole rail line and put it through inland urban areas, tunnels, and, it's a big deal to think about doing that. But the solution right now is a huge pile of rock on the beach, and that is not doing any good for the beach. And that's a solution that we've found in a lot of places. So I was involved in the Broad Beach decision in Malibu, where there was originally an emergency authorization, and that's how these usually go. There's an emergency, you say, yeah, we're going to approve it for now, and then you'll come in and do the permit to get it authorized, and we'll think more intelligently about what the real solution should be. In the meantime, 10, 15, Broad Beach decision was 2014. The rocks went in 2010. They're still on the beach. There's still no access. They're still sitting on lateral access easements, public easements. Is that ever going to change?
And Broad Beach isn't very broad anymore.
Kate? Kate, I can route this mic to you if you want to answer the hard questions, okay?
Thanks. So thank you so much. But looking at this slide, looking at Malibu and the public access easements that have been built into the permits for these homes that, as was noted, are now gone. And we know that, at least I've heard, that the governor has said that rebuilding homes after the fires, they're not going to have to comply with the Coastal Act.
That's not...
No? CEQA, yes, but I thought I heard Coastal Act as well.
Well, Kate might want to answer that directly. But the interesting thing is that the Coastal Act already provides a process in disasters where you do not require a CDP if you build in the same place and your footprint doesn't exceed 110% of what existed before. That process is already in place, and I do wish that when that announcement was made, and people got very confused because they thought the commission was going to require, so in a sense, not in a sense, in reality, this is already provided for in the Act. I wish that had been said at the time, but that's the way, that's the truth.
Thanks. Well, no, the question that I had was whether these easements can still be required, whether there's going to be a loss of public access.
That's an interesting question, and I don't think I know the answer to that. Well, they're on the beach, so I don't think you'd be building on the beach.
Under the normal process, if you want, when these homeowners go to rebuild, they would go to, in this case, the City of Malibu, because City of Malibu has a certified LCP, so they're the ones that are issuing the permits or waiving the permits. So under the normal process, the homeowner would go to the City of Malibu and say, here's what my house looked like before it burned down, here's what I want to rebuild. And the city would look at that and compare it and say, is this no more than 10% of the original footprint, and is this largely in the same location? And they would be looking out for things like, oh, and you're not encroaching on the public access easement that's next door to your house. Oh, you're not adding your additional 10% out in front where you already have a deeded access. Oh, you're not building a seawall that wasn't there before. The city would be the one to go through that analytical process.
We have some other questions over here. While I'm walking over here, the same thing came up regarding CEQA in that executive order, and we had a ton of phone calls on that at PCL, but very similar to the Coastal Act issue. Who was that?
Hi, my name is Christie, and I'm on the City Council in Pacifica, where we're trying to get our local coastal plan approved right now. If you search our city, we're one of the poster childs for coastal erosion. We've, in my district in particular, we've lost 3 apartment buildings, 13 homes just recently in the last 15 years. I'm really trying to understand the role of a city, the role of the state in dealing with erosion and the loss of
property. What I hear from the property rights folks is that we need to make people whole, right? It's difficult. These are their whole life investments. We're a middle class community. These aren't big hotels and big developers. These are, mostly normal people. Mostly. Yeah. Well, one abnormal one owned one of those apartment buildings. He fought the red tagging. It was like a last minute evacuation of the building. So this is what I call unmanaged retreat, as opposed to managed. He filed for bankruptcy. The city ended up having to pay to remove his building. And the city is now, trying by eminent domain to take the property and a couple of others to do an armoring project, because now we have to protect the road. And there was disagreement about the value of the land that ended up going to court. We lost once, we went to appeal, we lost twice. So now, even though this piece of land is unbuildable, we have to pay $2 million to him, plus the legal fees. And what I'm hearing from my closed session is on Monday, so I don't have all the details yet, but what I'm hearing is what may come out of this is that actually cities have a responsibility to protect private property, and otherwise it's a taking. So obviously that's terrifying for us, but for the whole state. So just curious what you think about that, but also and I know Senator Ben Allen was trying to bring laws together that, would help buy vulnerable property, that was then owned by the government, the state or local, and rent it back to people so that they don't have to move, right away. But eventually, when the property needs to be taken, the ocean is winning, we can do that more easily, and we've made people whole. And that has failed twice because there's no money. But what is the role of the larger government? Because we as a city cannot possibly deal with these issues that we're facing.
Simple question.
That's just really complicated. And it's really timely, right? President Trump is just talking yesterday or 2 days ago about getting rid of FEMA and how states need to take responsibility for these disasters. That's the same issue, right? State, city, federal government, state. Who's going to pay for all this stuff? And it's taking a step back. I don't think anybody wants people to not be made whole in some sense. It's a tragedy that these houses were burned, right? And we want to do right by the people who own property, including in situations like fire or shoreline erosion, which is why I focus on the planning process and the community visioning for the future in light of changing environmental conditions that we can't really control at some level. And so every context is a little bit different. Fire is, a huge environmental challenge, and we are coming to terms with the fact that we've built communities in a lot of inherently hazardous places. And so we need to figure out how to do right by the people who live there now and maybe didn't understand that at some point when they arrived there. But we're not going to just leave them hanging, right? It's kind of like phasing out coal mining. We're not saying, see you later, you can't get a job. We're gonna help those people who now can't work in that particular place, work somewhere else maybe. So I think we need to keep that in front of us, but the issues do depend. So going back to the public access issue and the public trust, that's a slightly different question when you've got a major public tideland property interest adjacent to private property interests. So it's not the same as a lot of private property interests that now need to be taken care of. They have some similarities, but I think it's why we need to keep working together at multiple jurisdictional levels to ask what are the best outcomes in particular places, what are the trade-offs, because there are going to be winners and losers depending on what you decide to do, and then who's going to pay for it. And that's a lot of the discussion is around those kinds of things. So do we want to, as a society, help each other pay for the changes we need to make to be safe and secure and protect the environment? Those are big questions that you have to keep grappling with in Pacifica.
Well, I also want to add that we need more champions in the legislature. We need, I can remember visionary legislators that, will just, when I think of them, I think, wow, what a warrior. And Senator Allen was really trying to address this problem, but he didn't get the support from other legislators to pass this policy. There's a lot of lobbying and politics that goes into all this. It's complicated, but he was trying to do the right thing. He was trying to address the problem. Now, I haven't talked to him about this, so I don't know if this is something he would revisit. Sometimes when you lose, once or twice, you decide not to keep going. But if not him, someone else has to take up this mantle, because it is an extremely important problem that's going to impact increasing numbers of people, and we just need more champions who can really take on a difficult issue and stick with it until they get to a solution.
We have time for one more question here.
Wow, the last question of the day. Recently, Richmond, California changed its policy to allow the capture of marsh gas to be then turned into liquid methane. What do you think about this and other ways in which we can acknowledge that sea level rise is going to happen, whether we want it to or not?
I'm not really familiar with this issue, so I don't feel like I can address it in any kind of depth. So, are you familiar with this project?
Not the details, but I could speculate. It sounds a little bit like other carbon sequestration ideas or methods to work with the environment in ways that would have some benefits, but maybe also some costs. And it's a short-run, long-run thing often. So we can talk about using wetlands in the bay, for example, to protect the shoreline because they do buffer wave energy. But how long is that going to last? And how much does it cost to restore the wetlands? What are the benefits you get out of those restored wetlands? And what do you do when eventually sea level rise overtakes those wetlands because you can't restore any further inland? So a lot of the adaptation discourse or conversation is around the phasing and sequencing of interventions to optimize our various things we care about, environment, safety, energy, over time as conditions keep changing. So it does always remind me of that the coast is never saved, because it's not going to stop, right? We're going to be having these conversations 25 years from now, 50 years from now, 100 years from now. The people will change, the specifics will change, but the challenge is still the same.
I think that's all the time we have this morning. I just want to thank the panelists again for taking your entire weekend to dedicate to this conversation. And I want to thank PCL again for making the space for it to happen. And I want to thank all the folks out here in this room. I know you have all been engaged in these battles and associated battles, and that you will be engaged in more in the future. So thank you for your service. Thanks in advance for what you're going to go on and do into the future. And just don't lose heart. Thank you.
Thank you so much.